Hey guys, welcome to the editing tutorial for DC Presets Pack 1. I have pulled a handful of images from all different lighting situations and scenery in order to give you an idea of how these presets work on different types of photos. Some of these are going to be really easy edits just to show you how they should be working if they are working at their best, and then some of them are pulled to show you how to correct certain problems that might arise. So we'll be looking at some indoor photos, correcting different types of skin tones, fixing greenery, and some other different things. So I'm just going to walk you through my workflow and thought process as I edit, and then show you how to make some corrections. So typically what I do when I look at an image is if it needs anything corrected straight off the bat, then I will do that before looking at the presets. So I make adjustments to exposure and white balance if needed, just so I can get an idea of what the preset actually will look like before testing it out on an image that's not really ready to be edited. So this one looks fine. I'm going to head over to my preset panel and just try a few and see what I want to use as my base. And you can also hover over them and see the preview in this panel up here. So I'm going to go for that one, and initially I just noticed that it's really yellow and a little magenta and a little dark. So I'm just going to bring the temperature down, bring the magenta down, brighten it up, and maybe bring the contrast down a little bit. And typically that is the goal. Hopefully that's how most of your edits are going, that you're just making adjustments to the white balance and exposure and maybe contrast, or at least just sticking within the basic panel. I try to make these presets so that you're not having to do much further than that, but sometimes there will be cases where that's necessary, and I'll show you guys what to do when that happens. So this one, again, doesn't need much straight off the bat. Maybe brighten it a little bit and warm it up a little bit. And then I'll hover over these presets. And then just make my adjustments to exposure and white balance. So if this was all from one set, then how I would be editing would be to edit one photo, go to the next one, and hit previous, and it's going to copy all of those settings rather than starting from scratch every single time. But since these are all different, I'm going to start fresh. But that's typically how I work when I'm working through a portrait session or a wedding. And it's nice when you're dealing with a lot of images taken in the same spot. So this one I'm going to brighten before I look at my presets. And then I'll just pick one to start. So I'm going to bring the shadows up since the highlights are already bright enough. I don't want to increase the exposure much more, so I'm going to bring up the shadows to bring some detail back in, especially on her face, and then just warm up the image. And I might want to brighten her face even further, but I don't want all the shadows to look washed out, so I'm going to use a brush, and this is in the Lightroom toolkit. I'm just going to use the Lighten brush and just put it on her face a little bit to bring some detail back in. Alright, so this one I'm just going to brighten a tiny bit. And this one I'm actually going to choose the worst preset for this image to show you how I would correct skin tone. So as you can see, it's a little orange and red and a little bit contrasty. So the first thing I would do is just make corrections in my white balance, and some of that will take care of the redness. So I'm just going to bring the tint down a little more green, and that will kind of counteract that red skin. And then I'm going to increase exposure a little bit and bring the contrast down. And you'll notice bringing contrast down will really help with skin that has a lot of red or orange in the shadows especially, or just looks a little bit too contrasty. And then I'm also going to bring the vibrance down a little bit. So you can see that already helps a lot without even going into other panels, but I'm going to show you how to also use the hue, saturation, luminance sliders to correct skin. So if it's a little red, you can use your orange slider and your red slider and bring them a little more to the yellow side. And then you can also bring the saturation of the red down, maybe the saturation of the orange down a little bit, and then you can play with bringing the luminance up. So that'll take care of that contrastiness and that redness in the skin and make it look a little more natural. Okay, so this one, we're also going to look at skin tone, but in a different way. So first I'm going to just warm it up a little bit, then apply a preset. And you can see here their skin looks a little bit washed out. So I'm going to first just warm up the image because that'll bring some warmth back into their skin. And then I'm going to decrease the shadows so that there's a little bit more richness to the image and it's a little less washed out. And then I'm going to bring the luminance of the orange down and maybe the saturation of the orange up a little. And something else I might do to this image if I wanted to take it a step further is add some more dimension to the background. So I'm going to use my darken brush and just brush that over some of the background. Maybe darken it just a little more. If you have the Lightroom toolkit, you'll have all of these brushes in your Lightroom already and an editing tutorial that will explain kind of my process behind using each tool. Alright, so now we're going to focus on greens. I'm going to just brighten this first and warm it up a little bit and then hover over the presets. So I noticed that some of the greens are really dead looking and some are really neon looking, so I'm going to try to balance that out. The first place I start with greens is actually in the yellows. So if you increase the saturation of the yellows, you'll notice you get a lot of color in the greens. So I'm just going to increase that a little bit, and then I'm going to adjust the hue of the yellow and green to just be a spot where I like it that looks more natural. So I'm going to bring the green a little more warm and the yellow a little more green. You can also play with the luminance of those, so the reason that some of these look a little washed out is probably because the luminance of the yellow is up, so if I bring that down, it'll bring some richness back into those highlights of the greens. So this one, focusing on greens as well. I'm going to brighten the image up and then apply a preset. Bring the contrast down and warm it up a bit. And then you can see that we've lost a lot of the saturation in the greens behind them, and the reason is because of the luminance of the yellow being brought up and the saturation of the yellow being brought down. A lot of times when greens are in direct sunlight, they can read as yellow on the camera, and so since these presets take down a lot of the yellow, you might want to bring it back up sometimes when you find that they're washed out like this. So I'm going to just increase the saturation of the yellow, and you can see them just come back to life, and then I'm going to bring the luminance of the yellow down a little bit. And then you can also mess with the hue, bringing it more green, just depending on the look you want to go for. So this one was taken after sunset, and I'm just going to brighten it, straighten it, and apply a preset. And then you can see that they stay really dark, so I'm just going to brighten the entire image a little more. But I don't want to brighten it too much because I want to keep some of the blue still there and not blow it out. So I'm going to increase my shadows to bring some detail back on them. And then I might use a lighten brush to just lighten them. Okay, and now I just want to get some blue back into this, so I'm going to increase the saturation of the blue and aqua, and then bring the luminance of those down. I can even play up this orange if I want to and bring the saturation of the orange up and the yellow up. Okay, so here's an image taken at golden hour. I'm just going to brighten it and then apply a preset. So I want to gain back that warm tone, so I'm just going to increase the temperature. And I noticed that her skin is getting really orange, so I'm just going to ignore that for now and get the temperature where I want it for the overall image. And then bring the shadows up to get a little more detail in her face. And now I'm going to decrease the saturation of the orange just to help her skin out a little bit, and then increase the luminance of the orange. If I want to get some more yellow in the background, I can use my golden light tool, and I'm going to use it as a gradient filter and just drag that circle around her so that it's affecting everything outside the circle. And then I can even go in and adjust the temperature from there. So this is another one taken kind of at golden hour. I am going to show you two ways to do this. So first I'll apply a preset, and I just noticed that it's really cold looking and I want it to be really golden, so I'm going to just increase my temperature a ton, and that's one way to do it. We could stop right there, but I noticed that the sky is losing a lot of its blue, so I'm going to show you another way to do this. So I'm going to take a step backwards, and then instead of increasing the temperature, I'm going to leave the temperature where it is and go down into my hue, saturation, luminance sliders, and just bring the saturation of the yellow way up and bring the saturation of the orange way up. And I feel like this as an overall image looks a lot better because you're getting that contrast of the blue sky and the golden field instead of it looking like it's just washed over with a yellow filter. Okay, for sparkler exit photos, a lot of times straight out of camera they're going to be really dark and really yellow. So first I'm going to just increase my exposure and bring the temperature down. Then I'll apply a preset. And just make my extra adjustments as needed. And then to get rid of some of that noise, I'm going to go into my noise reduction sliders and bring the luminance up. And I like to keep it right around 20 or below, otherwise it gets a little crazy looking. I might bring the color one up a little bit too. And then I'm just going to sharpen it a little bit to get some detail back. And I want this sky to be actually black because it looks a little weird trying to make up this light that's not there. So I'm going to go into my gradient filter and use the darken tool and just bring that down and then bring the exposure down. Okay, and then finally, I'm just going to show you the two black and white presets. They're pretty straightforward. The first one is a little more classic looking. I use this a lot for weddings or just work that I want to look more traditional. It's really simple and clean and just easy to use, so it's a great go-to. And then for the other one, it's a little moodier, so sometimes I use this on work that I want to be a little edgier or more artistic looking, so I sometimes will also go in and add some grain just to make it a little more film-like. So I'll just bring the grain up here Another thing I like to do is use my gradient filter and maybe add the darken tool or the moody background tool just to make it a little more dramatic, or play with my brushes and really play up the highlights by using the lighten tool on some of the highlights to brighten them, and then use the darken tool to really make those shadows rich. And yeah, that's pretty much all I do with black and whites, but hopefully this editing tutorial was helpful, and hopefully you're enjoying using these presets. If you have any questions, feel free to email us at shop@dawncharles.com. And if you post your images, I would love to see them, so be sure to hashtag DC presets. Thanks for watching, and I'm excited to see the work that you guys create.